Hey, everybody. Welcome. It's week 85 of which was, 2 weeks to slow the spread or whatever, soften the curve. 85 weeks later, here we are. But we're going to be talking about supply chain stuff, things that are in short supply. How do you deal with it? Like the Braves, they were in short supply of runs last night. Gosh, 7-2 spanking. Woo, that was rough. So anyway, sorry for that, Braves fans. Should be a good series though. So as people are ramping on here, hit us up with the chat. You can harass us. Hit us up with Braves and Astros, rants and raves, whatever you want to do there. Hit us up with the Q&A for questions. And Jack Santaniello, it looks like you're at the port of Long Beach.
Yeah, I'm actually hanging out in a hot air balloon. I was asked not to bring anything that has an ignition point like lighters or anything like that. So I'm good. And
that tie, we don't see that very often from you.
Yeah, I know. I would say that I really, this is my Halloween costume, dressing up like a lawyer. But actually, we had one of our young attorneys being sworn in this morning. So I was his sponsor. So went actually into the courthouse. No one's in there. So it was interesting to see the courthouse pretty empty.
Cool. Well, since you've got the background, we'll definitely throw it to you. Adam, do you have anything before, high atop the balloon in the port of Long Beach? Jack does his thing.
Yeah. So Jack, I will ask you to talk for longer than 2 minutes when you do your overview, because I forgot to grab something to drink and I'm going to need to go to the refrigerator to grab something. Parched. Yeah. So I had a couple things, a little bit later in the webinar. I think Gary, I'd like to share, to get back into topics that we normally talk about, succession planning. We put together just an illustrative timeline for you guys to consider, as you're thinking about succession planning, since that has been a topic we discussed in prior webinars. But, on topic, a couple different things. First off, with respect to North Carolina PPP, the update and the deductibility of expenses, the update that just came out in the Charlotte Observer, that's one of those words that I can't say correctly, I guess. Observer, I can't say wolves either. So apparently both Moore, Berger, that camp, and Cooper both believe that negotiations on a budget are proceeding well, and there could be an announcement of a deal in the next week. And as a reminder, in both the Senate and the House version of the budget, there was some deductibility of PPP expenses. The House version was exactly like the federal legislation, which is deduct them all. The Senate version had some caps, but both of them had something. So in theory, we may have something to say about PPP expenses going forward into the next couple of weeks about how we can get that money back in 2020. We did have, one of our clients that, got a notice from the North Carolina Department of Revenue that indicated, hey, man, you owed us a little bit of penalty and interest associated with your late North Carolina tax payment. So for a lot of people, when faced with the prospect of let me pay, $100,000 in North Carolina taxes that I think has a better than 50-50 shot of getting reversed and I shouldn't have to pay it, and I'm just going to get the money refunded later on down the road, I'd rather keep the cash. Well, the implication of that is that North Carolina would say, well, you should have paid it in April when it was due, therefore you owe me some penalties and interest. It comes out to be, a couple percent interest on the money. But when we go to amend tax returns for that, you'll get that money back, because North Carolina's position would be, we held on to your money, therefore we owe you interest. associated with it. So it's a hassle, but all this stuff will reverse itself. So that's good news in North Carolina. On the federal front, if you've been following the news, there's been talk of the billionaire tax and, potentially taxing unrealized capital gains that are sitting in portfolios, that with eventually that may be coming down to $25 million. That's all interesting. However, Biden and the White House just announced the deal that they're advocating for on this human infrastructure deal. So this isn't the big, real infrastructure. This is the human infrastructure deal, 1.75 trillion. It's confusing because they're, one's $1 trillion, one's 1.75 trillion. In this proposal, basically all that stuff that was in the $3.5 trillion proposal to pay for the $3.5 trillion proposal, for the most part, with respect to the people that are on this call, thrown out the window. So what is in there from a tax perspective really is targeted towards large corporations primarily. So it implements a minimum tax on both U.S. earnings and foreign earnings associated with large corporations, which they didn't, I think the number that they define is anybody that reports an accounting profit of over $1 billion should pay taxes. I would have a tendency to agree. Crazy. That's who they're targeting with this, is that you reported an accounting profit, you reported a profit to your shareholders, your stock price reflects it, yet you're reporting zero tax profit. You ought to pay some taxes, damn it. So that's one. The other big area that could impact some of our clients is there's a surtax on high net worth individuals of around, I think it's 2 or 3%. That's incomes of over $25 million is what they're targeting. So, not that many of our clients have annual incomes over $25 million. Some of them have incomes that hit that number in the year that they have a liquidity event, but that's the other big piece that's in there. The rest of it is just all about enforcement, just giving even more money for enforcement to go after people that they believe are cheating the system. So, there's still some stuff in the, that's good news, because that means that all the stuff that was passed by the Senate in the vote-a-rama that was part of the $3.5 trillion package that went to the House, that's not in what the White House just released. So who knows what will actually happen, but as of this minute, that's pretty good news for all of this, which kind of makes sense in some respects, because all of if the Democrats just did nothing but retain control, all of those tax cuts that were made by the Trump administration expire in 2026 anyway. So, they're going to go away anyway, unless somebody actively did something to extend them. So this sort of seems like one of those bloodless coup scenarios for them, where it's like, yeah, we're going to tax the super, super rich people, and we're going to tax corporations that don't pay any taxes currently. It's like, I don't know, not a lot of people crying for them on both sides of the aisle. So that I think is relatively positive news. And then the last piece that I'll hit on is that, we had a couple questions from our team about the restaurant revitalization fund and EIDL loans, and that's specifically around with the restaurant revitalization fund, having to report financial statements to the government. In theory, you're supposed to have to do that, but there's been no indication of how you actually would do that. So just got to stay tuned on that. And then the other thing that we've had some questions around is that for people that took EIDL loans, in the documentation on the EIDL loan, sorry about that. That's my stupid Siri. In the EIDL loan documents for people that took EIDL loans, there's some language that exists that says that you cannot make a distribution to yourself without approval from the SBA. The interpretation that, so that got a lot of people scared, like, crap, I took an EIDL loan. I've got some extra cash lying around. I need to, I'd like to be able to take a distribution. Can I do that without SBA approval? The interpretation on that, from what we've seen, that is supposedly sourced back to the SBA, is that while you still have unspent SBA funds, you're not supposed to make a distribution. That kind of makes sense. I got a $200,000 loan from the government on day one. On day two, I should not be writing myself a check for $200,000. Makes total sense. So what the SBA's interpretation is, once you've spent our money, you can do whatever you want. But while our money is still sitting in your account and you have not spent it, don't give it to yourself as a way of spending it, is the interpretation that we've seen. So that's the big stuff I got for today, Gary.
So before you make a beeline for the refrigerator to get your drink, just keep thinking, the back of your throat's hydrated right now, because this is an interesting thing. I was going to ask this question. 1913, when the federal income tax code started, does anybody remember what the highest tax rate was and the lowest percentage? Do you remember off the top of your head, Rain Man?
I don't, but then it got out of control as it went up. So
yeah, 7% was the highest.
Yeah.
1% was the lowest, but 1% was the lowest. That's right, Vicky. Robert Mayetta, as I was thinking about this, he comes in with this question. So here's the scenario. In 1913, when the federal income tax code began, it was only to be on incomes of 14 million and higher. That's interesting. That was a lot of money in 1913. Now we all pay. So suggesting that paying tax on unrealized gains on billionaires may sound like it won't impact the rest of us, but it's a slippery slope. Also, this was tried in the past in other countries and it failed. Do you know of any countries where it actually worked?
Nah, I haven't done any research on that, Robert, but I think this is just a statement that, look, the other side of that argument is you'd have to look at government spending in 1913 relative to gross domestic product, because that's really what you basically, you're taxing more people to fund the funding that you're continuing to increase. So it's like, until we get serious about spending less money, I don't know what to tell anybody on that. And I'm talking like real painful money, like military money, like if you look at the big buckets of where we spend money, the endowment for the arts isn't it. It's big programs is where you'd have to go do some damage. So that's my 2 cents. But that is a good question, Robert. I am kind of curious about it, and I'll have to look it up.
All right. So before you make the beeline to the refrigerator, one more question from Joe, and then we'll throw the mic back over to Jack and the balloon. But this is from Papa Joe. Is this related to the 15% minimum tax that Manchin was referring to?
Yeah. all this talk about the 15% minimum tax, really has two components. One is corporations' domestic profits, one level. And then the other level, which all the other developed countries have already agreed to in principle, would be to say, and by the way, you can't go hide it in Ireland. So having another element of that being taxes on comprehensive global profit versus just domestic profit. So it's those two pieces.
Okay.
And again,
all right,
corporations in this iteration are companies that report $1 billion or more on their annual report. So that really is targeted towards large publicly traded companies.
Yeah. Jack, Do we still have cell signal up there in the balloon?
Yeah, it's a little chilly up here though. Wish I had brought my my suit coat with me, but that's okay. All right, so before we get into supply chain discussion in further detail, there's two things that I want to report to all of you about that we've been talking about. At least one of them, and the other one, an interesting thing that's coming through on the federal level that is going to impact all of our businesses. I don't think it's going to get very far very soon, but first is we have in the past talked about business interruption and business interruption insurance. And if you recall from way back when, it was, well, interesting that companies have this business interruption insurance and that they are using it basically in a conjunction or in addition to force majeure clause and everything else to basically say that either to excuse performance or to ensure losses that are related to non-performance, either their non-performance or their customers and clients' non-performance. So essentially a reduction in revenue. And so there was a report that was put out by a national law firm about a week ago, and it was an analysis on the different circuits that have had this in front of them in the various recent months. And so just a quick discussion about the judiciary. You have the state level that has their Supreme Court, appellate court, trial courts. Then you have the feds, which obviously the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest level. Then you have the appellate court system, which are referred to as circuits. And they're around the country. And so, for example, North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia are in the Fourth Circuit. And so the analysis was done within circuits, even though some of them may have been state law cases. So that's how they kind of group them together. So the message is consistent, though. And so, for example, in the Ninth Circuit, there was an argument that inability to use its premises amounted to direct physical loss or damage to its property sufficient to bring its claim within the scope of the policy's business interruption coverage. And in that case, the court rejected that argument, saying that the direct physical loss of or damage to requires some kind of physical alteration to the property in question. So it's focusing on the physical aspects of the property. Another case was the reasoning behind the holding was there was a failure to plausibly allege that the COVID virus was present on the property and caused any damage, and its failure to allege that the stay-at-home orders caused its property to sustain any physical alteration. So that to me says that they're looking at, okay, was there some sort of chemical process that impacted the actual property? Example would be like an oil, spilling oil or other petroleum or other chemicals or something else happening to the physical property. So there wasn't that. In the Sixth Circuit, which includes Ohio, there was the holding that neither the loss of use nor the government shutdown orders constitute a direct physical loss of property or direct physical damage to it. And then in the Eighth and 11th Circuit, there must be some physicality to the loss or damage of property, physical alteration, physical contamination, or physical destruction. So the focus on those have been obviously on the property itself and any manifestation of the virus actually impacting that versus focusing on the business revenues and the production and everything else. So so far in the title of the article was insurance carriers enjoy unanimous success in a recent wave of COVID-19 business interruption decisions in federal appeals. So something that we've talked about a little bit, but is coming, is a brewing, is this federal line of reasoning that restrictive covenants, for example, those non-compete restrictions that you have in your employment agreements and in other agreements are restraints of trade. And that therefore the feds have jurisdiction, particularly the Federal Trade Commission, in order to potentially invalidate these agreements. And so to give you some of the reasoning behind that, and please don't panic, we're not anywhere close to you have to worry about your employees going out and competing with you because your employment agreements have invalid language in them, at least for this. I'm not saying that they're totally enforceable for all other reasons. But all right, so generally agreements between employers, employees raise more antitrust risk and include wage fixing agreements, which are a form of price fixing, and include agreements to fix salaries, set salaries at a certain level within a certain range or according to certain guidelines, or increase, maintain, or lower salaries by an agreed percentage. No poach or non-solicitation agreements, which are agreements not to recruit another company's employees, and no switching or no hire agreements, which are agreements to not hire another company's employees, may fall under antitrust regulation. So I personally think that this is way off base. I don't think this is going to go very far. I think it is a total uphill, like very steep uphill battle for the feds to get jurisdiction over this. Fortunately or unfortunately for the large companies that are fighting this, let them fight the fight and see where we end up. But I don't think this is really going to impact us as commoners in the business world. But I just wanted to alert you to that, because you've probably heard some rumblings of that in the news and maybe wondering if your restrictive covenants are at risk because of that. So turning to the supply chain. So let's talk about what are some of the links in the chain that are and some of them, I read this stuff and like, well, duh, that's obvious. And sometimes I read what the suggested fixes are. It's like, well, duh, that's obvious. But so it's more of a discussion as to how we do those obvious things. Like, for example, get those ships that are behind me into port rather than sitting out there. Because your potential Christmas gifts are sitting on those ships instead of on the shelves. So, all right. So here is a chain reaction for the supply chain. And I say this in that there are other articles out there that have said this is just the next level, or the trigger that tumbled the house of cards, that straw that broke the camel's back, all those analogies and sayings, that this was inevitable and that it just happened more quickly because of supply and demand, because we've all gotten used to basically pushing a button and then sometimes on the same day stuff magically shows up at your front door. So all of these things. So basically what they're saying is demand, the increased demand, the increased expectation of quick delivery, in contrast or in a system that is made to be a just-in-time system, so that there is not inventory being carried on the one end. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, people, business owners, suppliers, consumers went out and bought a ton of stuff and hoarded it and put it away for another day. So all of those things. So basically the supply chain is getting hit from different angles, right? And so here are some of those things that are compounding or components of the crisis, the supply chain crisis, which is shipping companies reduce their schedules in anticipation of overall slowdown of moving goods, because they thought that the demand would go down because people are not making more money, or not making the same amount of money, potentially they're at home. So, which was a mistaken presumption, in that people at home just changed their spending habits. What they did was they went out to Home Depot and ordered stuff to work on their house instead of going out to eat, instead of going out to the movies, doing other things. So they were still spending money and they were still consuming stuff. So surge in demand as Americans use, and I said this, use the money that they would spend on experiences and started spending them in their homes or on their homes. Exercise equipment, technology, and appliances, as people converted their homes into gyms, classroom, home offices, and restaurants. The surge in demand clogged our systems for transporting, as production facilities couldn't get all the materials they needed to create enough products they export. Shipping containers were getting stuck, sometimes for months, in places they shouldn't have been. And here's an interesting caveat to that. The New York Times reported that China shipped mass amounts of medical gear and protective equipment, like masks, all over the world to assist with the pandemic and to get these things out. A lot of those shipping containers ended up in countries that don't export. So you have these containers being stuck and it's costly to move empty containers. So those containers are getting piled up in places that they shouldn't have been. And then in this example, what used to cost maybe about $6,000 to ship from one of the ports in China to the West Coast, so $6,000 now costs about $30,000. So put all those things together. Other reports that this is going to linger into 2022. And so kind of just get used to it. Now, I don't want to steal your guys' thunder, because this Goldman Sachs report from a couple of days ago came from you guys, and they basically said, well, they call them channels for easing the supply chain issues. So I don't know if you guys want to go into that, or if you want me just to continue into what this article is reporting.
Go for it.
Okay. So to give cred to Adam and Gary, and I think actually Gary, who sent this to us, that it was a Goldman Sachs economics research report that came out 2 days ago. And the title is called Track My Package, a Roadmap for Supply Chain Normalization. And there were suggested 3 channels or 3 processes that could be improved or addressed. And this is one of those, like, okay, yeah, duh, but I'm going to say it anyway, because this actual report is, I don't know, maybe 30 pages, and it goes into all kinds of charts as to the reasons why and how you actually make that happen. So it's not only just the, hey, this is a good idea. It was specific as to this is how we have to implement it, because we have seen in the past how it needs to be implemented, how it should not be implemented. And so how do we get to the end result, which is get the supply chain back to, and I think last week we talked about, I think I said it was like 12 minutes per container. If it were faster, this would be done, right? So the first channel for easing supply constraints and core goods inflation is a rebound in Southeast Asia chip production. We have become so dependent upon technology that even the simplest things now use chips. And so those chips are not being produced. And so you have a lot of stuff being made, and with waiting for that magical chip to be put into them for whatever reason, or whatever the reason the chip is for. The second channel is improving the labor supply. Again, a no duh moment, but they go through the numbers and saying, okay, how do we do that? How do we get to that point? And then the next is reducing port congestion after the busy US holiday and pre-Chinese New Year shipping windows. So this goes into, and I'm sure we can produce this or give you the link to get to this article, but if you're interested, I mean, it goes into the automotive sector and number of automotive semiconductors per vehicle. And it goes into how many of these pieces of electronics are in our vehicles. And as of 2021, the average number is 298 conductors are in our vehicles to run them, versus it looks like maybe 50 in 2002. So basically a 6-fold increase in the number of components. And that's why it costs so much to fix our cars. And also, as a side note, a conspiracy that you can't get to anything in your car, even if you knew how to fix it, except for the battery port terminals to jump your car or to check your oil. And if you want to do anything yourself, you need to basically dismantle all kinds of pieces of stuff. So that is my automobile manufacturer's conspiracy theory for the day.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Of when my dad and I rebuilt our 460 cubic inch Ford Thunderbird engine in my dad's Kansas garage, those days are over. Oh man, you remember those days, Adam, don't you?
Still living those days. With the 1967 Ford Mustang convertible.
That's right.
I fought with an electronic distributor now for going on about 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right. Well, questions. What are you guys? So we got 34 people on here right now. So thank you for continuing to be on here week in, week out. So many of you. What's on your mind? It doesn't have to be related to supply chain, other than Papa Joe was looking for some of his stuff and he wanted to know which container it was in. I just said it's a red one. Oh, cool. Yeah. So Adam, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host because you can go ahead and talk to us about succession planning if that's what you want to talk about.
Yeah. So is anybody else in the call might be thinking about questions they might have for this week? You know, again, we're still in speculative mode. You know, one of the things we have been hitting on again is around estate planning, succession planning, you know, buttoning things up. And, you know, everybody kind of talks about, you know, best practice would be start thinking, you know, well in advance of when you actually need to transition your business. So for a training course that we're launching for our clients, you know, we put together a 5-year timeline that I think is extremely realistic around what you could follow. I just want to spend a couple minutes going through that so that people had a chance to start thinking about it. Is, you know, I think 2020 and 2021 were kind of a reset expectations of where I'm at in life for just about everybody. So I would encourage, you know, any business owner to start thinking about, okay, I need to finally get off my butt and start thinking about the succession plan. So that in mind, here we go.
Yes. And Joe, Sean has been bugging us every day about that. So just so you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Watch your back, Joe. Yeah. So, you know, this to me would represent a best practice of a 5-year window. You could compress this if you wanted to, if you had less than 5 years, but you know, year one would really be all around plugging the leaks. And by plugging the leaks, it would be, you know, identifying what do you really need to retire. You know, there's a couple different formulas that are out there in terms of determining what your retirement needs to be. You know, you need to understand what your company worth today to understand what your other asset base is, to understand what your gap is in those retirement goals. And then, you know, if you've got risk problems, meaning, hey, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, you know, who would come in and open the door and would my family get taken care of? You know, you need to get those addressed. And I really think that that's a good, if you're trying to put this on a clock, you know, if you got that accomplished in the first year, that'd be great. So in year 2 and 3, you know, we've dubbed this building the franchise, which is really all around, okay, if assuming that I have a gap in my retirement and there are leaks and I need to increase the value of the company somehow, let me start focusing on fixing those value problems, you know, which are, you know, better growth, you know, customer concentration problems. If I've got process and legal issues that I need to get sorted out, like, you know, hey, my business is in distribution and, you know, my agreement with the manufacturer was a handshake that we did over a beer 20 years ago. You know, time to get that stuff buttoned up. If you got cost structure problems, you know, employee risk problems, you know, years 2 and 3, if you can focus on, you know, fixing the problems that you identified in year 1, I think that's pretty good. You know, year 4 is your time to start thinking about how can you take a step back by getting the business not dependent on you, coming up with another valuation to make sure that you are on track to hit your wealth goals, and then start picking your team. You know, if you don't have an M&A advisor, you don't have a wealth manager, you know, you don't have a transaction attorney, go ahead and get that sorted out so that you've got those ahead of time as you start to think about running a process. And the last bullet really goes unsaid in this area, which is, you know, in our experience, you know, there's all sorts of stats on how quickly people die after they retire. And if they don't die, how quickly they become depressed or alcoholic or whatever, like pick your whatever. So, you know, this is really the opportunity to say, look, I mean, I need to have something that I'm retiring to. You know, otherwise, why would I retire? Like if I don't have something that I'm retiring to in terms of a hobby or a life plan, you know, this would be your chance to figure it out, because otherwise, you know, while you may be wealthy, your retirement will be absolute misery, you know, for you, because if your whole life was tied up in what you're doing, you know, and you haven't figured out how to have a life outside the business, then you're just going to be miserable. And then year 5 really is go time, you know, get the transaction done. So, you know, from our perspective, you know, if you followed a structure like this very methodically and with discipline, anybody can pull this off and get the value that they need to accomplish their retirement. It just may need that you need to, you got good profit, but you need to double down on growth. Maybe your growth is already pretty good, but you got cost structure problems. I mean, whatever it is, you can figure it out. But my own opinion is no, I defy anybody to not be able to have a saleable business in 5 years if they really, that's got their risk mitigated. If they have a disciplined structure. I mean, there's no business that couldn't be sold in this time frame at maximum value if you just follow the structure and the discipline that we've laid out here.
And if I could add to that, one thing that you mentioned, whether it's internal or external, when you know that, it makes a difference in where you're going to go. And the example would be is, you have a child who has been working in the business. And so, I have always thought that if, a very successful business owner, CEO that wants their own children to run the business, first of all, don't make an assumption that that's what they want. There have been a lot of surprises that, and the kids not wanting, as adults, don't want to disappoint their parents. And then all of a sudden the bombshell that, well, I really don't want to go into or continue in this business. I have my own path and my own desires. And so, and that changes obviously the trajectory of the sale to an external sale. The other is that groom that person sufficiently. So have them literally and figuratively work in the mailroom and work in every aspect of the business. Had a client who it was the son-in-law which is also another potential issue. Hopefully the son-in-law and the daughter stay together forever and ever. But assuming that that's the case, this person went through every part of this business from the bottom up, and which was helpful for his career, but also garnered the respect of the various division heads and others, that this wasn't some entitled kid that was inheriting the business. It was someone who knew how to talk the talk and walk the walk in becoming the essentially majority owner of the business down the road. And then, kind of lastly, it's for an employee, a key employee, same thing applies, which is have them go through everything and make sure that that they have the knowledge and the respect to be able to move forward as an outsider or as an insider. And then if that doesn't work, then, just accept it for what it is and move on to a potential outside buyer. But the sooner you know that, the better, because it does, I've seen, make an impact on your pathway and what you do over the course of time to make the business more sellable to an outsider versus an insider that understands the skeletons and the challenges and is okay inheriting that, moving forward and working toward resolution of what those issues may be. An example may be recently for me is I have a client who purchased 2 different automobile dealerships, one a Chrysler and one a Chevy dealership. And as you can imagine, the new car inventory is not so great. The used car inventory is not so great. And so, but it's something that was known, and it's a problem that is going to continue moving forward. And this person is bringing in their children into the mix of things. And so, and so down the road, it's just kind of a known issue. And the expectation was that this buyer was taking on this burden, knowing that if he had to flip the company in the near future, let's say 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that was going to be a challenge. So it was a long-term plan for him to turn around this business when those cars get those chips in them and they start getting shipped and all the supply chain issues are fixed. So again, sorry for going off on a tangent, but I think that the knowing which channel with respect to internal, external prospects is important, but don't feel like you're strung by that, because a lot of the things that will apply to both, meaning getting the valuation of the company, knowing where the challenges are, working towards addressing those challenges so that it is a good deal for your successor internally or a potential third-party buyer that's looking to find all those issues and reduce the purchase price.
So I'm going to weigh in on the last point that you made, Adam, on making sure that you're going to something when you exit, and being prepared for that. When I was in this private equity group, we had 300 ultra high net worth families that they were all business owners. And that's exactly what we saw. And we worked really hard to make sure anybody that was exiting, if we had the time to get ahead of it, so that they didn't get into that depression or worse. There's a great book called My Next Season, written by Leslie Braxick, but her business partner is Mark Lintz here in Charlotte. Good friend of mine, was the former treasurer of Bank of America. And they work with execs, business owners, et cetera, that are, they've had a career, and then all of a sudden, then what? But it's called Your Next Season, but their company is called My Next Season. And on page 51, I'm actually featured in it, but just about connecting with other people, but understanding what you want to do. And because it's a real deal when you've been, put your heart and soul into something, and then all of a sudden you got time on your hands wondering where's your value. I saw that my dad struggled with the same thing. So that's a really important deal. So anyway.
Thank you for that. I just added that to my list. I keep on in my Outlook and one of the notes, a list of, because, we all have, like what just happened, which is someone say, hey, this is a great book to read. So I keep track of that. So thank you.
Yeah, they have a lot of really interesting stories, because they work with a lot of, Fortune 100, 500 executives. Some notable names that you would know have gone through kind of their transition coaching, if you will, on what they do. It's really cool. So, and it's cool that it's started here in Charlotte, which I love that too. So, any questions out there? Joe, Robert, you guys have kept things lively. Vicky, good to see you weigh in here. I'm not seeing any of those boats moving behind you, Jack.
Yeah, they're not. That's the problem. They're all anchored.
I think we need to get those crane operators moving. I've seen too many stories about where, the cranes are still silent. Like, what's up? I don't know.
Yeah. And there was, if you remember, President Biden, I think, either ordered or strongly suggested that maybe the LA port run 24/7, which has helped, but marginally. It really hasn't had the impact that I think he was hoping for, or that others were hoping for. So yeah, we still have issues. I mean, that is the picture that's behind me is a recent picture from a couple of days ago, I think. So
wow. Oh, interesting. Good question, Robert. Gosh, I knew we could count on you. Any word on changing the Obama rule of limiting truckers to 10-hour shifts?
I don't know anything about that one.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that where that is going. There are a lot of issues with that, which is, and I have a friend who was, I call him the safety czar. He was at Maersk Sealand for a long period of time, and just the stories he would tell me about people falling asleep and things like that. And so that's going to be a challenge to get through. It's and the argument is, well, you're trading off additional capacity for people's lives. So it's like, okay, add a couple hours here. Well, it's only going to kill 5 or 6 people, so that's worth it. Is a very flippant and obviously not valid argument. but it's, the opponents, that's what they're saying, which is we don't want these truck drivers out there driving. And then also add the additional distractions. I mean, you hear stories about the driver that's looking down for a second. And when you're going 75 miles an hour, that makes a difference, because then you're trying to slam on the brakes of all of this weight, and it's just not going to happen. So, yeah, trying to teach my kids to always look in the rearview mirror. And so, for example, and this is way off tangent, but, I turn on my emergency lights as I'm coming to a stop, and the car is probably the next car is about half a mile, but I'm coming over a hill and they can't see behind me what's going on. And so my daughter's like, well, why did you do that? And I explained why I did that. And it's like, well, it may, some people may be like, oh, that's just stupid. I'm like creating a crisis or whatever on it. I'm like, no, I mean, who cares? I mean, if it helps even marginally to slow those people behind me down and not create a chain reaction, then that works. So anyway, there's your automotive transportation driving public service announcement for the week.
Thanks. I was thinking that would lead into some sort of a dad joke, but I don't know.
I have some. I pulled some off my calendar this morning. I don't know where they are. And they were Halloween based. If I find them, I'll let you know. Maybe they're in my briefcase. Maybe it's divine. It's divine intervention that I don't have to tell you guys that.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Any other questions out there? Also, who knows? We keep thinking that Congress is going to get their act together and actually pass something. Who knows? The longer it goes, the more I kind of wonder. And who would have thought West Virginia is kind of they're the keystone state on what's going on, thanks to Joe Manchin. If you guys have any other thoughts of topics that are valid and that you want us to address in the coming weeks, which I suspect we'll continue doing this for a while, let us know. My email address is gfrey@trustbgw.com. You can hit me up and I'll add that. Be happy to. Anybody that came on here late, we will put this up on the BGW CPA YouTube channel this afternoon.
I found them.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
I didn't talk fast enough.
Nope. And actually I found some notes that I thought I left at home too, so it's all good. All right. So I'm going to give you a non-Halloween one. You get two for today. All right. So
oh boy.
This is more of a statement. Winter sports fans need to accept it. Skiing is going downhill. There you go. Okay. Yeah. All right. Oh, that's what I need to do. I need a sound effect for that. All right. I have my son do that, and I'll record it and bring it in next time. All right. Yeah. All right. So this is the Halloween one. What did the demon eat for breakfast?
Devil's food cake.
Oh, close. Deviled eggs. That's a pretty good guess. Okay. I'll keep trying.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, I'm not a fan of deviled eggs, but I am a fan of devil's food cake. So that's why I went there. All right. Last call. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Adam and Jack. And
someone Jackie, help me get down now.
Yeah. We'll call in the drones.
Have them shoot little holes in the balloon and then come down slowly.
Yeah, make sure that they're small.
Yes.
and they'll be using prop guns. Oh my gosh. Anyway, you guys have a good one. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.